Hey everybody, and welcome to Epic Everyday, our weekday podcast for busy, stressed out Christians who want to do more than just survive. I'm Liz Frericks, and this is my husband Evan.
Hi.
We're so glad you guys are here with us today on this wonderful Thursday.
Is it Thursday?
Yes.
Well, happy Thursday. And thank you for spending part of your Thursday with us. We appreciate that. Thank you for listening. And if this episode has been, well, you don't know yet, do you? But if you find it to be useful or interesting, please share it with someone and see what they think about it.
Since it is Thursday, our CSC of the day is being connected to it's both our connection to God and our connection to other people. That's where our power comes from. This week we are talking about prayer, so we thought we'd talk about some of the practicalities of prayer today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe some of the things that, we've been talking about some things that block us from praying or praying in certain kinds of ways, but, maybe there's just some general confusion about, I don't know what words to say, or when I hear other people pray, they're so eloquent and it never sounds like that when I do it.
Right.
Or maybe there's other anxieties about prayer. I mean, maybe it feels like that's the priest's job to pray, not necessarily my own job. What other barriers do you see?
Well, I mean, those were the ones that I came up with. Just, I think sometimes we get focused on we need to have the right words, say it a certain way, or that we need to say a lot of things, like God doesn't understand our hearts. I know I can get into that mode with people where, I say something and then I feel like maybe I wasn't clear enough. And so I just go overload on the information.
Sure.
And here's everything in the kitchen sink about this topic that you never needed to know. And they did understand me in the first place, but just because for whatever reason, I felt like I needed to clarify. And I think sometimes we do that with God, too.
Yeah.
Instead of trusting, He knows our hearts. He knows what's going on.
Yeah, but then at the same time, we're also commanded to pray without ceasing. And so then sometimes that might feel like, well, what am I going to talk about after the first 10 minutes?
Right.
But it's an interesting practice to try it because there are always more things. More cares we can cast on God, or more prayers to pray.
Right.
But yeah, sometimes it feels kind of like, okay, I'm commanded to pray, but I don't really know what that means.
Right. And the pray without ceasing thing, the way I see it is, staying connected. So if you have a phone and you call somebody and maybe if you're like Evan and I were during our dating years, there might be some time where you're just sitting in silence, and that's okay.
But you don't want to be the first person to hang up.
Yeah, you're still on the phone. You're still connected. So that's the kind of relationship we want to have with God.
Yeah. In the same way, maybe it's okay to fall asleep praying too, because we've definitely fallen asleep talking on the phone when we were in college a couple of times.
A couple?
But, that kind of constant contact, that constant communication, that desire to constantly be communicating, that's a beautiful thing. But it's interesting, but as far as practical prayer, God has some really good instructions for us. We're all familiar with the Lord's Prayer, but I wonder if we are as familiar with the verses leading up to that in Matthew. They're pretty interesting.
I'm going to start in chapter 6, verse 5. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray, standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by men. I tell you the truth, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. This, then, is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one.
I was really struck by the structure of that prayer. You know, it's if you grew up in any church at all, you're probably have that prayer memorized, and it's often prayed corporately, you know, as kind of a prayer.
Right.
But James Bryan Smith, in his book, The Good and Beautiful God, we went through that at church a few years ago, and he was talking about how, you know, like Jesus was saying, this is an instruction here to the people and to the disciples about how to pray. So it's less of an example kind of script of a prayer and more of a structure of a way to pray. And James Bryan Smith does a wonderful job. He's like, so do this for yourself. And we did an exercise where it's like, take the sections and rewrite this prayer yourself. You know, the sections are the Our Father in Heaven. So we're acknowledging God in His self. We're worshiping Him for who He is in His holiness. And then thy kingdom come, thy will be done. We're asking for God's will. Before we've even asked for anything, we're saying, God, your will be done, please. And then we can ask for our daily bread and for forgiveness and for protection from temptation. And so each of those are sections. And if we're not sure about what to pray, we can just look at each of those and be like, okay, well, in the Our Father in heaven, holy is your name. What can I worship God for? You know, and take each of those sections and be like, well, what can I do in here, in this kind of category of prayer, and go through this progression? I found it to be very, very helpful to my prayer life and very interesting.
Yeah, and it goes back to the whole idea that we don't have to pray using certain words. And that's what Jesus is saying in the little prologue to the prayer. I mean, we don't want to pray to prove how awesome we are. We want to pray because we're in a relationship with God. And then when he says, do not keep on babbling like pagans, you know, it's kind of that idea of like a mantra prayer where you're just saying the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over and over, trying to convince God or something, or make sure
wear
that
him
he
down a
heard
little
you.
bit.
Yeah, I mean, well, we saw that when we looked at that passage in 1 Kings 18 with Elijah.
Yeah.
You know, the prophets of Baal are repeating over and over their prayer towards Baal for an entire day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, you know, but there are some prayers. There's a couple of Psalms which have this kind of repetitive structure. So it's kind of interesting. God's given us some prayers that, if that's something that appeals to you for some reason, but there the repetitiveness is always like, God, I wish I should have looked one up, but it's, you know, there's a line
Give
of
thanks
whatever.
to the Lord, for he is
Yeah,
good.
so
His
it's
love
this
endures forever.
Yeah, so it's this sticking God in his place over and over again throughout the prayer, and then there's different lines in between, but like after every line is this kind of response.
Right.
And it's pretty amazing.
Well,
but yeah,
and
it's not
a heart
babbling.
issue.
Yeah.
You know, are you using certain words to try to force God to respond in a certain way?
Right.
Like, are we treating him like he's a vending machine? Or are we actually, you know, do we have a heart that... Because there are times, honestly, where, you know, when something difficult is going on in my life, I will pray about the same thing over and over and over again.
Well,
but it's not... I'm continuing to bring this to God. Okay, every time I get worried about, I'm starting to get worried again. Okay, Lord, please work in this situation. It's not a like, okay, I'm trying to, if I just say it enough or I say it the right way, then that will guarantee the kind of answer that I want.
Well, there's a difference between asking God for, you know, trying to twist his arm somehow over and over again versus trying to constantly surrender this problem in my life. Like,
right.
God, I'm impatient again. I'm upset about this and I don't want to be. I want you to have your perspective on this, but I don't have it. Like, and then maybe 5 minutes later, I got to say that again because I haven't changed enough yet. I am still the problem. And so there is repetitive there because, you know, we change slowly often.
Well, and I think, you know, if we really thought about that in the context of relationships in general, we would understand how it works better. You know, for instance, if I was talking to you, I wouldn't ask you over and over again the same way, expecting it to like wear you down or something. Or I wouldn't, you know, one of the things that really bothers me about this issue is that it prevents people from praying. You know, they're so worried about saying the wrong thing that they don't say anything at all. Yeah. And if in the context of our relationship, like if I was so worried about saying the wrong thing to you, I just never said anything at all,
there's no relationship.
Right, exactly.
And I've experienced that kind of, maybe you haven't, but that anxiety, with other people where it's like, well, I'm going to hang back here. And then you hang back so much that there's no relationship. And like, even though there's desire on your part to say something or to whatever, I've experienced that. And it dries the relationship up real quick.
It does, because from the other side of the coin, it feels like you're not engaged, like you don't care.
Mm-hmm. Something else that, with speaking of not needing to repeat words and talking to God the way we would maybe a beloved friend or a spouse, is I think we get into the habits of certain cadences and prayers and stuff, and I don't think it's really a problem, but it's something that I kind of notice sometimes where will say Lord or just like after every kind of phrase, like a couple times in each sentence, like, Lord, please, Lord, help me, just, and when I'm listening to other people's pray, I hear that, and then I may not notice it when I pray it, but those are kind of, I think, filler in like words, or it turns into this kind of prayer jargon, I guess, and we don't have to do that either, but it's probably less of a big deal, but it might be something to listen for if it's, I think we all kind of might struggle with that. Maybe it just has to do with how we learn to pray, or how the people around us pray, and we pick up certain slang, I guess.
Yeah. The main thing is, if you're coming with a heart that's seeking God, there's not a wrong way to pray.
That's right. And if you want some structure, like we said, we can take apart the Lord's Prayer and use that. Even though you're using the same structure, you can never pray the same prayer twice, because you're filling in whatever's going on with you in that moment, in that structure.
As always, pick whether today is going to be awesome or not, whether you're going to strengthen those neural pathways to look for the good things or to look for the bad things. We love you guys, and we are praying for you. Thanks to everybody that's been listening to the show and sharing the show. We really appreciate it. If you have found this episode helpful, please do share it. And come back tomorrow, and we're going to talk about living in the real world. How prayer helps us do that.
Like we do every Friday, except for the prayer part, but the living in the real world part, that's our Friday topic of complete.
All right, you guys, have a wonderful Thursday.
Yep, talk to you later.